Greetings. Thanks you for being here for such a long day, but I think you've enjoyed the rich content that we have. So just a couple of more panels before we have the Rums of Puerto Rico event. So just bear with us. I'm really excited to present the next panel. We have my friend Ivan Zavala from Reality Realty, Ivan, and Alejandro Krell from Paladin. So let's start with Alejandro. Can you give us a little background of what you do for a living?
Good question. I moved to Puerto Rico a year ago, so I don't do much of anything anymore. So until a year ago, I'm still working with a private equity fund manager out of Los Angeles. We raise capital institutional funds in the U.S. We invest in real estate exclusively in Latin America, mostly Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, Peru. We also have assets in Costa Rica and Uruguay. I moved to Colombia 6 years ago to open an office there. We opened one in Lima, one in San Jose, Costa Rica, and now I moved here and I opened one in Puerto Rico with the intention that someday also bring capital either from the US or from South America to Puerto Rico. Mostly what we do is housing, 70%. Mostly of the housing we do is middle income. We like that. We also like to do subsidized housing, all for sale, but we're also looking at impact funding and we're also looking at income. So on a personal level, if I may, for 30 seconds, professionally architect, never really practiced, got a master's in urban planning and a master's in business and finance. My whole life has been about real estate, my whole life has been about housing. It's been 35 years. I know I don't look it, but it's been a long time. And one thing that I'm excited about being here in Puerto Rico is not only just being in this country that it's just amazing, and we can get into that later, but everybody already talked how amazing it is. But the fact that I lived in 5 continents, in about 9 countries, and believe it or not, in 56 years I lived in 52 houses. So I've seen a lot of experiences in terms of urban development, in terms of life, in terms of real estate development in general. So hopefully, we can brainstorm ideas and work on some great stuff like Ivan is working on, and contribute to do something that if I can.
Sure. So let me introduce my other guest and my dear friend Ivan Zavala from Reality Realty. Ivan, welcome.
Thank you, Ricky, for being here. It's a pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about what your real estate company does and the different branches.
Sure. So I was raised in New York. But I was born in New York, but I was raised here in Puerto Rico since I have 1 year. So that's probably I have a typical language, Puerto Rican language. So you will understand me. So we have a boutique firm. We have over 100 agents in Reality Realty, but we also manage in Realta Group, which is a conglomerate that manage real estate, urban development, hospitality, and so on and so on. So in order and I came here just to talk about real estate as usual. That's the only experience that we have in Puerto Rico. And in order to create probably the foundation for the next questions, we bring a short 7-minute video to highlight what has happened in Puerto Rico for the last 10 years. What we think are the real estate opportunities, the 16 real estate opportunities, and our local projections about the market.
So let's see that video. Production.
Sure. Puerto Rico is the best place to live, work, retire, and invest. With all the incentives and opportunities presented today, I'm sure by now that you have a clear sense on why investing in Puerto Rico is a smart move. Before we talk about the real estate opportunities in Puerto Rico, more specifically urban development, let's take a quick look of the real estate and economic cycles we've been through for the past 10 years. After many years of economic recession, on 2012, Acts 20 and 22 were signed, bringing positive change on the luxury market and high-end properties, to the point that even though real estate prices continued to decline in general, there was a distinct growth on the high-end market where prices doubled or tripled, creating the demand for new development in certain areas. Then, on 2017, Puerto Rico was destroyed by Hurricane Maria, where technically prices hit bottom and the recovery phase began. Now, Puerto Rico is about to receive an unprecedented amount of recovery funds Adding to this, on 2019, 98% of Puerto Rico was declared an opportunity zone, creating an accelerating effect on our recovery phase, setting the path for recovery at a much faster rate than would have been expected. So now, as local investors, we present you where we see the biggest opportunities and potential for real estate investment. First, affordable housing. In 2018, statistics reflected that 71% of owners-occupied units in Puerto Rico had a value of $149,000 or less. 53% of occupied rent units pay less than $500 per month. And 58% of households have income and benefits of $24,000 or less per year. Second, assisted living for the elderly. World population is aging. By year 2050, about 22% will be 60 years or older. In Puerto Rico, this trend is even more evident. Currently, 25% of Puerto Rico population is 60 years plus. By 2050, this percentage is expected to rise to about 40%, almost 18% more than the estimate for world population, thus reinforcing the need for modified affordable housing units targeted for this sector. Recognizing that a society is aging rapidly can surely sound discouraging, but it can lead to a better urban planification and opportunity. It's a reality that 25% of our society is 60 years plus, but it's also true that 21% are millennials. And if there's one thing these two major groups have in common, is that their lifestyle is a priority. So it's not about the house, office space, building, or mall anymore. It is about lifestyle. It is about experience. Even more and more people are looking for the live-work-play balance. So this takes us to our third area of opportunity, urban retail. It's the fact that new development projects will be less about retail only and more about providing customers with fun, unique experiences that elevate urban shopping to new heights. The target is no longer generational, it's about common interest. Puerto Rico historically has been an attractive destination full of beautiful landscape and warm people. After 2017, the aftermath of Maria brought us to the center of global attention. This added to attractive tax incentives for the development of world-class tourism activities, highlight the hospitality sector as our fourth area of opportunity. These opportunities, affordable housing, assisted living, urban retail, and hospitality, perfectly coexist and enrich urban centers, bringing together a diversity of cultures, making urban development and revitalization the smartest and most socially conscious investment, where the increase in property values is greater to the added value of their hyperlocal investment compared to an individual project. It is highly recommended that for a successful urban plan development, the investors or developer associates with a local partner to ensure that residents are integrated into the process and their needs are met. In our urban revitalization projects, art and culture has been our inclusive model and the driving forces.
back to Ivan. You have not seen that presentation before, right?
I haven't seen it.
What are your impressions?
Perfect. I mean, just perfect. I just met Ivan just a few minutes before this chat, and there's so much in common that I can't wait to talk more. If I will. Yeah.
There's a reason why you are in this panel together.
Yeah, no, I figured. He's like, okay, great, because I tell you, the key word is, and you said it in the video, it's not about the house or the office, it's about the urban design, urban development, and the whole thing, and the livable balance. I mean, there's so much more to building a city and building a country than just building one nice building. You know, that's one of the essence. But again, what you're doing in Casa Sierra it's just unbelievably intelligent, and I think we can get into in the conversation.
You just mentioned Calle Serra, so Ivan, why don't you just give us a little insights for people that are not aware exactly of what you have done in La Calle Serra?
Well, La Calle Serra is just an example of what we can accomplish in urban development through the 78 municipalities around Puerto Rico. And because we are brokers and we have been working arm's length with a lot of capital, hedge funds, etc., private investors, one thing that concerns me, and if we look at the statistics, is that we are creating, there's a demand for tourism, but at the same time, there's not a demand for just one property or a solo project. And because of the tax incentives, we're very motivated in order to execute and to buy and to do things, but probably we're doing things not taking in consideration that all the opportunities can perfectly coexist in for example, in a urban center. And people are looking for hospitality, doing a hotel in the middle of nowhere, probably, or they're doing an elderly, or they're doing affordable housing, or they're trying to bring a mixed project. And we have 78 municipalities that, for example, in Santurce, we used to have 200,000 people living back in 1970. Now we have less than 80,000 people. So we have, let's assume that we have at least 100 vacant spaces, 100,000 vacant spaces for retail, for living. Why we have to construct every in other parts when we have the infrastructure, we have the mix of culture, and we have 78 municipalities, and it's happening. So it's an example of what we can do in Puerto Rico with a profound social impact, getting some transformation in those areas that are needed.
Actually, let me just tag on that, because I'm sure the crowd, most of people that are from here, they know the story, but I didn't know it, and I thought it was fascinating. The reason why you picked that street, and how not only it's a great business strategy, but you're also, you're preserving the folklore, you're preserving a very important part of the city.
Sure. Yes. First, we look at a place that has a real history. Tourism is not about anymore of going just to a fancy hotel. It's about knowing how the local really lives. It's not about going to a tourist trap. And for example, Calle Serras, Calle Loíza, certain places in Rio Piedras, people want to go there because they want to see how we dance salsa, our local restaurants, our culture, our heritage. And even though if you walk through La Serra, you will see a lot of holes in the pavement, people love it because it's a reality. And for example, in Calle Serra, salsa was promoted in Puerto Rico, and salsa is one of our major strengths. We are salsa. Well, if you are from Cuba, you will say that salsa was born in Cuba. In Puerto Rico, we say it was in Puerto Rico, and I would say it was in Calle La Serra. We used to have a lot of the main salsa distributors were there. Prostitution were born in La Serra also. So if you back in 1950s, 1970, and also if you go there, but because of La Serra now they're putting better ties. They're
that's a lot more fancy.
That's right. And urbanism, beautiful urbanism, was born there. So it's a lot of history that have been in different cycles, and I believe that just the storytale of La Serra, as so many other storytales in urban centers or town cores, are just what we need in order to bring people. And those are the places that real needs a transformation because people are living there. And one of the major attractiveness that this kind of movement has is that you're staying in a place that you're living with locals. So that's amazing. Imagine going to Paris or Argentina and just not staying just in a place that are just solo tourists. Staying in a place that you can live with people, that you don't need guards because people are there 24/7. Staying.
For the record, Ricky, I'm not Argentinian, I'm Uruguayan, so.
I was going to ask the same thing. But Ivan, I get the social aspect of what you're telling me, and I've known that I've lived it. But from an investment perspective, in regards to the return, how does the urban development compare to other investment assets?
That's a great question, and I will tell you. I started 24 years ago when I was probably 23 years investing in income-producing properties. And my first investment was in Calles. For me, that's like the Aspen of Puerto Rico. Calles is the center of the island. It's a beautiful municipality. And I bought these 4 apartments, and I remember 24 years ago that the rent were like $375 per apartment. Today, probably the rent is like $450. So the increase in value in almost 30 years has been nominal. It doesn't happen that way in urban development. Why? Because the aggregate value of investing in a hyper-local place will create a multiple factor that you just will experience it if you play Monopoly. Have you played Monopoly before? It doesn't happen. If you play Monopoly, you remember that there's different mindsets. You can. Whenever I stop in a property, I will buy. That's one strategy, right? But there's another strategy that if I try to have 80 or 100% of a place and I start to do investment, the aggregate value of doing this will double or triple the rents in probably 2 or 3 years. So I haven't experienced that in 24 years, but I experienced it when we start urban development.
And geographically, I know you have a big footprint in Santurce. Where are all the locations that you would suggest is a good place to start looking at?
Well, I will start with, as I said, we have 78 municipalities, 78 plazas, 78 Catholic church in the plaza. That's like the traditional way, the Spanish way that we build our municipalities. But for example, in San Juan, you have more than 3. You have Santurce, but you have Sagrado Corazón, you have Old San Juan, you have Rio Piedras. So even though it's one municipality, you have different town cores that you can do the same. You can replicate the same concept. So imagine a place where you can have affordable housing. For example, in La Serra, we have low-income families. We have Act 20s and Act 22s renting there. We have people from the cryptocurrency market. We have porn star in La Serra because they
data.
They stream. No, I have to. Yes, that's another industry. We have restaurant. We have diversified income from parking, restaurants. Let me tell you this, and this is just what we have done. We have been, we enter in the food and beverage because if we are creating value and you are renting a commercial space between $20 to $30 per square foot, but Ricky is a great operator. He has 4 restaurants, and he wants to be in La Serra or he wants to be in your project. And Ricky sells over $1,000 per square feet in his restaurants. Probably you can have a partnership with Ricky and say, Ricky, come to my place and let's build 2 or 3 restaurants. We are doing that. So the numbers are higher than if you start to be creative in urban development.
So Alejandro, one of the reasons I wanted you on this panel because urban development and blight go hand in hand, and I know you and I have discussed Calle Loiza. So what you have seen in Puerto Rico so far, how will you handle blight?
Yeah, it's a tough question because, I only been here for a year, so I've been coming to visit Puerto Rico for the last 2 years, so I don't have the perspective of where Calle Loiza or Calle Serra was, 5-10 years ago. But you can still see a lot of opportunities, and I understand that Loiza is actually also evolving. Even in the last year that I've been here, I see more restaurants and more things happening. There's still a lot to be done, and even areas, and I wanted to bring this up too, ask you about La Placita, because an area like La Placita is great, but actually I wouldn't say it's great, it's good, it could be great. There's still a lot to be done. And I think one of the key players that doesn't get mentioned much, and I don't want to have an opinion because I'm new in town, so I don't want to offend anybody, but what part the public sector has on fighting blight and redeveloping parts of the city. You have to go hand in hand between the private sector and the planning commission or whatever you have here, or some kind of entity that supports, either provides incentives. It's just some simple things as, just fixing the sidewalks, or even, just not allowing parking or cars in La Placita. I mean, how simple is that? But not knowing the politics, I don't want to have an opinion. It's just something that you see happening in many parts of the world, and say, well, why can't it happen here? So many aspects of blight that can be fixed. It requires resources, but I tell you, having been involved in projects where this was actually in Saudi Arabia, we had to redevelop slums in Jeddah, right? There is 52 slums in Jeddah where 1 million people live. And the government had asked the company I was with to go in and find market solutions to fight the blight in the slums, so that not the government would put money and fix it, but the private sector would come in and fix it. And of course you need the public sector to support the effort. But money will come if there's a clear path and there is entrepreneurs like Ivan here that can see the vision and put the vision together. But complex subject, I think we don't have time for it now, but happy to discuss it over a drink with anybody.
How about over cocktails?
There you go.
Got it? So Ivan, going back to your investments opportunities right now, what are your next projects with Reality and Rialto Group and all your branches?
Well, actually, we are trying to make an example in order to conduct new investment with a profound effect on the economy. And I know that we're looking for high-end luxury, and there's a need for that in certain areas, such as Dorado, Bahia, actually Palmas del Mar, San Juan, that will be extended because there's no new development for it. So if you compare the people that are coming to Puerto Rico versus the new development in that segment, there's more demand than offer. So that will mean that for example, suburbs like Guaynabo, Garden Hills, La Villa de Torrimar will start to have those families, and that's very important. But we cannot forget that 70% or more than 80% of our people live outside the metro area. So in order to doesn't have a fragile structure in the next 10 years, we have to invest in those communities, and that's why I bring the urban development as an example in order to do it. So if we don't balance that from the get-go, we will have an inequality as we have never experienced before. We will hurt more the middle class than the lower or the higher end.
I'm gonna go a little off script, but we have this conversation offline. All of that you have mentioned requires capital.
That's right.
Is there a disconnect with local capital and foreign capital?
I think yes, because foreign capital is more a sophisticated investor that are looking for probably that needs to know more about the economy in Puerto Rico in order to capitalize best the return of investment. So we have a commercial department in Reality Realty. We work with a lot of funds, and they're looking for the same. They're looking for the same concept that they know. It's a hotel, or let me use this development, etc. But we have to go deep, and you will find that there's other better alternatives with less risk. I will say that urban development is the most alike of preserved capital. There's lower risk because you have so diversified income, product of the investment as a whole, that if you start to do that, even though you don't have to do it oneself, you can bring the hospitality sector, the ones who are specialized in the elderly, affordable housing, mixed projects, and we can do great things in Puerto Rico.
Ricky, can I just
Of
add
course.
one more thing? So, I mean, you touch on the key words. I just want to phrase it differently because we bring foreign investors to Latin America. Now we're thinking of bringing Latin American investors to the U.S. And the key difference between the two is the perception of risk-adjusted return. If you live in the country, you know the country, you understand it, you're willing to take a much lower IRR, return on your investment, because your perception of risk is much lower. If you're a foreigner coming in, even if it's Puerto Rico and it's in dollars and so forth, there's still the perception is very, very different outside of the country, right? So I think that's the key and the perhaps disconnect that you mentioned.
That's an outstanding point. And even going back to how can we, and this is more about public policy, do you think the government can do a better job of promoting local capital to invest, for instance, in real estate?
I will not bet on the government, with all due respect, on almost anything. I think the private sector has to do everything in Puerto Rico, and they have to follow our lead. La Serra is the best example. We have been working there for 4 years. We don't have sidewalks. We don't have new pavements. We don't have electricity. There's a lot of things that has to be done. But how can the private sector are leading everything, but they are not even though following? That's, for example, you have heard Estuve when he mentioned 10 years in permitting processing in order to do a marina. 10 years.
And that's for him.
And real estate is the same, because if let's say that we have a demand right now in order to make a project. 2 years in permitting, 3 years in construction. In 5 years, you have another cycle. That was happening in 2008. People start construction in 2003 or 4. They get the permits in 2008, and the cycle were different. So we have to work with the permitting process, and the government has to work arm's length with the private sector.
Again, I want to add something. I hope you don't mind adding things. But again, the first thing I did when I came here is I joined the Builders Association of Puerto Rico. And I just met a lot of the members, and I go to their committees, and I'm really impressed at the fact that as an association, as a professional group of local builders, they actually are pretty smart about going to the public sector, to the government, and lobby for laws and trying to change and get things moving. And I would say you need to get the public sector to come along. And I think Puerto Rico has some really good and smart people in some agencies. But to follow your investments, investors will come, but investors also need certainty, and you need to get the public sector to support it somehow. So we gotta figure out how to bring the two parties together, and if anything, just put pressure, because the private side, funds the politicians, and believe it or not, may not be the best way to run a democracy, but they need to listen. They need to listen to the business side.
And I think that's happening. And I have to say that there was an old school in the government, and there's a new image. There's new people. There's new millennials, Generation X, that are coming to the government with new mindset. People from the private sector, as Alberto Baco, that went to the government. So that's happening. So I'm just saying that the private sector doesn't rest with in the government will. But yes, certainly we need the government in order to be successful.
So Ivan, as we wrap up the panel, there's a couple of conferences left after this one. So what are your just general thoughts about what we have done today in investment real estate, what's happening in Puerto Rico?
Puerto Rico is the best place to invest. So if you go to California, you will trade properties at a 2% cap rate. So even though you have a declining market in certain municipalities, what I think that's not anymore happening, because we haven't seen any drop in values since probably the last 12 months. Puerto Rico, you can triple prices in certain areas in 2 to 3 years. Dorado Beach is a perfect example for that. The average price in Dorado Beach was probably $1 million like 4 years or 5 years ago. Now probably it's twice that. So there's a lot of examples why Puerto Rico is probably the best place to invest, and because not just the tax incentives that, as I mentioned in our presentation, thanks to Maria, we have that was probably one of our best publicities in order to highlight our strengths in Puerto Rico, and that's what we call in Spanish, que O sea, it's like silver lining.
It's a blessing in disguise.
Eso es así. Así que, so we're the perfect place to live. We have over 5,000 people that has moved to Puerto Rico between companies and high net worth individuals. And I think that Puerto Rico will become probably one of the most expensive markets in the world.
And Alejandro, for yourself, what are your
Last
closing
few words,
insights?
yeah, newcomer, so very little insight, but I tell you one thing though, I'm very bullish in Puerto Rico. I moved here and I'm staying here, and I think you'll take me out with my feet up first. But you know, there's great opportunities to learn from around the world, different places. I mean, Dubai is a great city-state that, you know, with almost nothing, they don't have oil. Everybody thinks they're rich in oil, but they don't. They create a great brand. Puerto Rico is on the way to doing the same thing. You got other very small nations. Uruguay, my country, is a very small country, 3.4 million. It's not like a star, but you know, it's stable and it's growing. Singapore, Switzerland. I mean, you got a lot of great examples around the world where you don't need a lot of capital. You just need human capital and goodwill and patience and long-term planning, which is, yeah,
Exactly, human capital.
So thanks for our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you.